Forced labor, sterilization, arbitrary detention, destruction of heritage, Orwellian surveillance. As ordered by Xi Jinping, the party is using all the tools of dictatorship to mercilessly eliminate all those who resist it. The Chinese Communist Party's General Secretary thinks the region's inhabitants should have complied a long time ago, believing that Xinjiang has always been part of the national territory. But the facts are stubborn and contradict the Chinese president, who's rewriting history as he pleases. Centuries earlier, Uyghurs had settled in these arid reaches of Central Asia, around the oasis cities of the Silk Road. It was only in the mid-18th century, after fierce battles, that the Qing dynasty occupied this territory. The Chinese emperor named it Xinjiang, which means New Frontier in Mandarin. Xinjiang was a Chinese colony, but the name was rejected by the Uyghurs, who preferred the more political Eastern Turkestan.
Certainly I think one of the biggest issues with the Chinese state's governance of this region is that the Chinese government does not recognize the local inhabitants as the indigenous population of this region. The Qing Empire makes it a colony. It starts a civilizing mission. It tries to promote the Chinese language, Confucianism in the region. But in many ways, that whole effort was quite a failure. And so by the fall of the Qing Empire in 1911, the region had not really become Chinese.
Ever since, the Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities of Xinjiang have rejected assimilation and often rebelled. In the early 20th century, a Uyghur independence movement emerged, and in 1946, the Uyghur political leader, Ahmadjan Kazemi, became president of the Eastern Turkestan Republic. The government was under Soviet influence, but the Uyghurs were independent. They had a country and a flag. Three years later, when Mao created the People's Republic of China, the issue of Eastern Turkestan's independence arose again.
Stalin was very suspicious of Mao, but he recognized the victory of the Chinese Communist Party, and at this point they were all socialist brethren. And so there was very little that Ahmadjan Kazemi could do other than simply to acknowledge this victory himself. He renounced the Eastern Turkestan Republic and began negotiations and discussions with Chinese communist officials in Xinjiang. And there was to be a meeting known as the People's Consultative Conference, held in Beijing in August of 1949. And so the Eastern Turkestan Republic leaders were invited to go to Beijing for this conference and took a plane. Nothing more was heard of them for several months. And then in December, Chinese authorities announced that the plane had crashed in Siberia near Lake Baikal and all passengers had been killed.
The convenient death of Ahmadjan Kazemi brought an abrupt end to the young Eastern Turkestan Republic. The Uyghurs found themselves unwillingly in the Chinese fold, but Mao showed diplomacy. To counter a desire for independence in the region, he pledged the cultural identity of Uyghurs would be respected. In 1955, the great leader created the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region.
因为我们看到中国共产党当政以后，他直接模仿对象就是苏联。那么，所以中国了那个政府了，那么也就根据斯大林的民族的定义，那么把中国分成了现在是叫56个民族。那么所谓的有语言呢，有居住的区域啦等等的。然后他在模仿了苏联的所谓的民族区域那个自治的那个这么一个体系。那么这就是中国今天的自治区制度。
Now, in Xinjiang, what that meant was that the Uyghurs had a special place. Uyghur language was legally allowed to be an official language. It was used in education through the school system all the way from kindergarten through university. Newspapers were published in the language. There was an active publication industry in other materials in history and literature and so on.
Despite all this, integration into communist China wasn't straightforward, especially since, for months, Uyghur farmers saw thousands of Han Chinese from eastern China settling in the region. This first wave of immigrants joined the Bingtuan, a semi-military organization created by Mao to run this Chinese Far West. The Han settlers claimed the best land and built huge farms, schools, and dispensaries. Their mission was clear: to ensure economic growth, social stability, and ethnic harmony, and crush pro-independence activity. The Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region was autonomous in name only.
In 1955, the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region was proclaimed, nominally under the governance of a Uyghur official, who was the governor of the official. But as with this entire so-called autonomy scheme, real power continued to lie in the hands of the Chinese Communist Party. And in Xinjiang, always, the first party secretary, the man with the real power, was always a Han Chinese.
Mao's first economic reforms were a fiasco, and in the late 50s, tens of millions of Chinese starved to death. By launching the Cultural Revolution in 1966, the communist leader hoped to cement his power. Repression was rampant throughout China. In Xinjiang, the Red Guards destroyed mosques and persecuted imams. Thousands of Uyghur families took refuge in neighboring socialist republics. However, China soon closed the borders and held would-be exiles prisoner. Everything changed when Mao died in 1976 and Deng Xiaoping came to power. The new Chinese strongman wanted to give ethnic minorities a real say in China's affairs. This fight against Han chauvinism was led by a survivor of the Cultural Revolution purges, Xi Zhongxun, Xi Jinping's father.
Xi Zhongxun, the father of current Chinese leader Xi Jinping, was one of the figures responsible for this reform of ethnic policy after the Cultural Revolution. And he was known for being someone very, very sympathetic towards non-Han peoples, and who advocated taking a soft touch to these ethnic issues in China, and in particular to working with local elites and to supporting their culture and trying to co-opt different cultures into the Chinese system rather than trying to convert them or repress them.
In the 1980s, Islam rose from its ashes in Xinjiang. Mosques were rebuilt, and traditional languages were given more prominence. You could even be a party member and a practicing Muslim. But this golden age couldn't hide another reality. There were more and more Han Chinese in the region, and they were claiming all the land's natural resources.
在80年代之后，特别是在90年代市场经济起来以后，新疆各个方面，经济、教育、公共服务都变得是全中国可能是最落后的一个省份。同时呢，中国的国有企业在新疆的开发，比如说在新疆的石油的开发，并没有让当地人民享受到利益。
As inequalities deepened in Xinjiang, the Chinese Communist Party feared renewed tensions with the Uyghurs. At the end of 1991, a global event made Chinese leaders nervous. On December the 25th, the Soviet Big Brother's red flag flew for the last time at the Kremlin. Socialist republics gained independence. The USSR disappeared. China feared it would meet the same fate.
Many in China interpreted the breakup of the Soviet Union as a result of Soviet nationalities policies. In other words, that they had planted a time bomb administratively in their entire system by supporting those different nationalities, which then rose up to sort of break out and lead to the explosion of the Soviet Union.
There was basically a worry that the Uyghur region, Tibet, maybe even Mongolia, that they could become separate states. And the Chinese Communist Party wanted to make sure that that was avoided at all costs. I remember being in the Uyghur region maybe in 1994 and hearing from Uyghurs saying, there's now a Kazakhstan, there's a Kyrgyzstan, there's an Uzbekistan. Why is there no Uyghurstan?
Chinese authorities were terrified of a contagion of independence in Xinjiang. In the name of maintaining stability, repression descended once again. Islam, revitalized in the 1980s, was once again in Beijing's sights. Religious gatherings were banned. Quranic schools were closed. Several thousand Uyghurs were arrested. Some, deemed too radical, were tried in public and executed. In response, demonstrations broke out in Gulja, in the north of the region. Thousands of soldiers quashed the protest, firing live rounds. The clashes lasted for 2 days. Officially, 9 people died. Unofficially, it was more than 100. In the following days, bombs exploded in Urumqi and Beijing. In Xinjiang, Chinese authorities claimed to have found many arms caches and reported more than 200 attacks, blaming Uyghur terrorist groups. To Beijing, independence activists, religious leaders, and terrorists were one and the same enemy. The attacks on September the 11th, 2001, gave China an unhoped-for opportunity to justify its repression of Uyghurs. And so, the world learned the name of a terrorist group which China accused of carrying out operations on its soil, the Eastern Turkestan Islamic Movement. Beijing claimed this terrorist group, hostile to China, was trained, equipped, and financed by Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda.
As a scholar, I and my colleagues had never, ever heard of the Eastern Turkestan Islamic Movement. It was basically the vision of one man by the name of Hassan Massoum, and he was a very religious person, and I would say a religious nationalist. He believed that religion should be the vehicle that could bring independence to the Uyghur territory as a Uyghur nation state. However, it also never really became a coherent organization at all, and certainly didn't have the capacity to carry out any violent acts.
Beijing claimed the opposite when before UN representatives, and brandished the spectre of an Islamist caliphate in Central Asia. The Chinese painted Xinjiang as the axis of evil. Chinese authorities obtained the approval of the international community to wage their own war on terror. In 2002, the Eastern Turkestan Islamic Movement was added to the US and UN list of terrorist organizations. In exchange, China allegedly promised George Bush it would not oppose his plans.
There's no smoking gun to tell why the US recognized this Uyghur organization as a terrorist group. But there was a lot of speculation at the time and after that it was about getting the People's Republic of China to acquiesce to the US invasion of Iraq, which would happen the following year.
History was repeating itself, and once again, Xinjiang was under strict surveillance, because at the dawn of the 21st century, China was preparing an event to cement its power. Nothing should stand in the way of the success of the first ever Chinese Olympics. Just a few weeks before the Games, another organization, the Turkestan Islamic Party, released a video warning that it intended to target Olympic sites. In response, China flexed its muscles. 100,000 police and soldiers were deployed in Beijing. The man in charge of supervising this global event was none other than Xi Jinping. No attacks, more than 1 billion viewers during the opening ceremony, a record medal tally for China. The Games were a huge success for China and a stepping stone for the future president.
中共的话呢，他在那个就是2008年呢，他成功的举办了奥运会。那么他觉得呢，他做的呢是非常的了不起，那么成为了就是崛起的大国。但是紧接着呢，你会发现呢，那么7.5事件爆发，那么7.5事件爆发呢，就使得2008年打造的这种所谓大国崛起了。那么一下呢，我觉得就是那个变成了一个就是尴尬。
On July the 5th, 2009, everything changed in Urumqi. Exactly a year after the Olympics, 1,000 to 3,000 protesters demanded justice after 2 Uyghur workers were lynched by Han Chinese in southern China. At first, the police managed to disperse the crowd, but after a few hours, they lost control.
There are some reports that they actually shot at the demonstrators with live ammunition from the very beginning. So after the peaceful demonstration was repressed like this, then a riot did break out.
That evening, the situation turned into a bloodbath. Armed groups of Han Chinese and Uyghurs exchanged blows. The settling of scores lasted several days and left hundreds dead. There were thousands of injuries and arrests and many disappearances.
Even though there was violence on both sides, Han and Uyghur, the Chinese government essentially blames Uyghurs. I think those riots were incredibly important because that created a real sense that the Uyghurs are a violent threat to society.
The central government accused foreign Uyghur independence groups of having planned and led these violent riots. According to Beijing, these separatists had declared a holy war against China.
By calling it a terrorist event and saying it was entirely a one-sided attack by Uyghurs on Han, the Chinese authorities have really missed the opportunity to try to get to the source of this interethnic tension, and they're simply trying to paper it over.
The Urumqi riots traumatized the entire Chinese nation and strengthened the hatred between Han and Uyghurs all over the country. As the police state was reinforced in Xinjiang, several tens of thousands of Uyghurs chose to flee. They took refuge in nearby countries, or in Europe and Turkey. A handful of them became radicalized and left to wage jihad, especially in Syria, giving Chinese leaders an opportunity to crack down even harder on the region's inhabitants. When elected Communist Party General Secretary on November 15, 2012, Xi Jinping made control of Xinjiang his priority.
The approach that his father took in the 1980s doesn't seem to have achieved this goal of stability, which is so important to the Chinese Communist Party. And so perhaps Xi Jinping, for that reason, thinking his father might have failed with that approach, has decided to take a completely different one.
Xi Jinping's method would be forced assimilation, the rapid transformation of Xinjiang's population into good Chinese. To achieve this, the president drew inspiration from a 2011 article published by two-party ideologues. Hu Lianhe, who defended China's position at the UN in 2018, and Hu Angang, an economist who supports a China united around the ultra-majority Han ethnicity.
团结，只有民主团结，中国才能够成为世界真正的世界强国。这是我的结论。少数民族保留自己的文化，同时他作为中华人民共和国的公民，他也要学习我们所说的汉语，对吧？因为这是国家文字。你们应当老老实实的向中国虚心学习，来了解中国为什么会成功。这是根本点。
In their article, the two professors advocate the relentless dilution of minorities' ethnic consciousness, the promotion of inter-ethnic marriages, the generalization of Mandarin, and the adaptation of demographics to the situation. This article became the basis for a plan developed at the highest political level and methodically executed.